Vocal depth analysis, distinguishing maternal discovery from child pain. The 911 scream as forensic evidence, a college-level examination of vocal acoustics, emotional state, and timeline reconstruction. Within the 911 recording of the call, made on December 26, 1996, exists a sound that has been examined, interpreted, and debated across decades of investigation. A scream. The question that forensic analysis must address, with precision and without assumption, is deceptively simple. Whose scream is this, and what emotional and chronological information does it contain? This question sits at the intersection of multiple forensic disciplines: vocal acoustics, behavioral psychology, physiology, and timeline reconstruction. It requires us to move beyond intuitive interpretation and into a rigorous examination of what the voice itself reveals about identity, emotional state, and the possibility of deception in real time. The physiology of human vocalization, fundamental frequency and vocal tract. Let us begin with the physics of human vocalization. When a human being produces sound, that sound is generated by the vibration of the vocal folds, two bands of muscle tissue located within the larynx. The rate at which these vocal folds vibrate determines what we call the fundamental frequency, zero, of the voice. This fundamental frequency is the primary determinant of what we perceive as pitch. The fundamental frequency of any individual's voice is determined by multiple physiological factors. The length of the vocal folds. Shorter vocal folds vibrate more rapidly, producing higher frequencies. Longer vocal folds vibrate more slowly, producing lower frequencies. This is why, on average, adult men have lower fundamental frequencies, 80 to 200 Hz, than adult women, 160, 300 Hz, and children, whose vocal tracts are smaller, have even higher fundamental frequencies, 250 or 400 Hz or higher. The mass of the vocal fold tissue. Heavier tissue vibrates more slowly. Lighter tissue vibrates more rapidly. The tension of the vocal folds. When vocal folds are tensed, they vibrate more rapidly, increasing frequency. When they are relaxed, frequency decreases. The subglottal pressure, the air pressure beneath the vocal folds. Higher pressure produces more vigorous vibration and higher frequency. The vocal tract itself, the cavity extending from the vocal folds to the lips, acts as a resonator. The shape and length of this cavity amplifies certain frequencies while dampening others. This acoustic filtering is largely determined by the speaker's anatomy and is relatively stable for each individual, meaning that the resonant characteristics of a person's voice remain largely consistent across different utterances. These properties, fundamental frequency, harmonic structure, resonant characteristics, combine to create what forensic voice scientists call voice print or speaker profile. While not identical to fingerprints, these characteristics are sufficiently distinctive that trained experts can often identify speakers and, more importantly for our purposes, can distinguish between certain categories of speakers, such as adult versus child, male versus female, or individual voices within a population. The 911 call, what the recording contains. In the 911 recording from the Ramsey home, investigators and analysts have identified multiple vocalizations. The call begins with what appears to be adult female speech, the voice that identifies itself as Patsy Ramsey, stating her name and address. The speech is initially relatively controlled, though with signs of distress. The dispatcher can understand the content relatively clearly, though the caller's voice quality indicates emotional arousal. But there are other sounds within this recording. There are moments of what has been described as screaming, vocalizations of higher intensity, higher frequency, and of emotional character. Some analysts have interpreted these sounds as originating from an adult. Others have suggested they might represent a child in distress. The critical question is, What are the acoustic properties that distinguish a child's cry of pain from an adult's cry of horror or maternal distress? Acoustic differentiation, the child's cry versus adult distress vocalization. A child experiencing acute pain or threat typically produces vocalizations with the following characteristics: fundamental frequency in the 300 to 600 Hz range or higher, reflecting the smaller vocal tract and lighter vocal fold mass of childhood. A quality of sound often described as piercing or shrill. This reflects not just high frequency, but also the particular acoustic properties of the small vocal tract. Harmonic structure that may show evidence of a periodicity or frequency instability, reflecting the physiological disruption caused by extreme emotional arousal or pain. Relatively simple resonant characteristics, less complex filtering than adult vocalization due to the smaller, simpler vocal tract. Duration patterns often characterized by bursts of sound, as opposed to the sustained vocalizations adults are more capable of producing. A quality of urgency and immediacy. The sound itself seems to communicate present, ongoing distress rather than reactive horror. Contrast this with an adult experiencing extreme emotional arousal, such as discovering a child missing or in distress. Fundamental frequency elevation from baseline. An adult's voice will rise in frequency when emotionally aroused, but typically remains in the 150–300 Hz range, even with significant elevation. A quality often described as gravelly, raw, or strained, reflecting the physiological effects of sudden emotional shock and adrenaline on the adult vocal mechanism. Greater capacity for sustained vocalization. Adults can maintain screams or shouts for longer periods than children. Complex harmonic structure and nuanced resonant qualities reflecting the larger, more complex adult vocal tract. A quality of emotional reactivity. The adult's scream communicates response to what has been discovered or understood, rather than present physical threat. The distinction, stated simply, a child's cry from immediate pain or terror sounds qualitatively different from an adult's cry from horror or maternal response. The critical question: voice analysis of the 911 recording. When forensic audio experts have examined the 911 recording in the Ramsey case, what have they found? This is where precision becomes essential, because the interpretation of these recordings has been subject to dispute. According to the statements made by various parties and investigators, Patsy Ramsey made the 911 call. She identified herself. She communicated the emergency to the dispatcher. There are moments within the recording where her voice is clear and identifiable. There are other moments where there are screaming sounds. John Ramsey stated in his interview that he heard Patsy screaming, described it as a scream of panic. He noted that he heard her screaming when calling for him earlier. He was present in the house during the call and could attest to the source of vocalizations. But what audio forensics might reveal, if proper spectral analysis were conducted on the recording, would be whether the screaming sounds present in the call have acoustic properties consistent with an adult female voice in emotional distress, or whether any of the vocalizations have acoustic properties consistent with a child. The significance cannot be overstated. If analysis revealed that screaming sounds within the 911 recording had fundamental frequencies and harmonic characteristics consistent with a child's voice, a voice that was not JonBenet's, since she is not known to have been present at the time of the call, that would suggest a child was present and vocally expressing distress during the morning hours. Alternatively, if all vocalizations were consistent with adult vocal characteristics, this would support the narrative that the distress being communicated was adult response to discovery, not indication of a child's present suffering. This is not speculation. This is forensic audio analysis, a legitimate discipline with established methodology and professional standards. The timeline problem. When could the scream have originated? Now let us layer another level of analysis. The timeline of the morning of December 26, 1996, as reported, proceeds as follows. Patsy awakened, put on clothes, applied makeup, and came downstairs intending to prepare for the family's early departure to Michigan. At 5:45 a.m., she discovered the ransom note on the spiral staircase. She read the first part of the note, immediately screamed for John, and checked JonBenet's room, confirming the child was not in bed. She ran back downstairs in a panic. John, hearing her scream, ran downstairs from the shower. They converged, discussed the situation, and Patsy called 911 at 5:52 a.m. This timeline, assuming its accuracy, means that by the time of the 911 call, the parents had already discovered the absence of their child. They had already read the ransom note. They had already initiated panic. John was in his underwear, having come directly from the shower. Patsy was in a state she herself described as hysterical and nuts. The 911 call under this timeline represents adult response to crisis already discovered, not discovery of crisis in real time. But here is where vocal analysis becomes significant. If the screaming sounds audible within the 911 recording originated during the call and had vocal characteristics inconsistent with an adult in discovered crisis response, this would suggest something different. It would suggest that something was happening during the call, not before it. What could have been happening? The ransom note had instructed John not to call the police. It had threatened consequences if instructions were not followed. According to the note's text, there were supposed to be 2 gentlemen watching the child. The note threatened death if instructions were not complied with. If, at the moment of calling 911, in direct violation of the ransom note's instructions, a child was present and began to vocalize in distress, that vocalization would have a particular emotional and physical quality. It would not be the response of a child already lost hours earlier. It would be the response of a child present, reacting to the moment of police involvement. This is where the analysis shifts from simple acoustic differentiation into timeline reconstruction using vocal evidence. The ligature problem. Could a bound child vocalize? We must also ask a physiological question. Given that the child's body bore evidence of a device around the neck, a garrote, could that child have produced the kind of vocalization that might be present in the 911 recording? The presence of a ligature around the neck would create specific impediments to vocalization. Compression of the trachea and larynx would restrict airflow, making loud vocalization difficult or impossible. Pressure on the vagus nerve could create specific neurological effects. The physical positioning of the device could restrict neck movement and jaw positioning, affecting articulatory capacity. If a child had been alive, but bound with a ligature device during the morning hours, the child's capacity for producing the kind of clear, penetrating scream characteristic of a child in distress would be significantly compromised. The screams would be muted, strangled, perhaps barely audible. Conversely, if sounds in the recording are heard as clear, high-pitched child screams without the acoustic signature of compression or restraint, this would suggest that if a child was vocalizing, the child was not yet bound, or was bound loosely, or was not physically present at the time of the recording. This creates a logical pathway. If the child was already deceased by the time of the 911 call, as some theories suggest, there could be no child vocalization present. If the child was alive but bound with the garrote device as theorized in other scenarios, vocalization would be acoustically distinctive due to the laryngeal compression. If a child was vocalized freely without restraint, the child was alive and unbound at that moment. The behavioral context. What would a parent say? Let us also consider the behavioral and linguistic content of the 911 call itself. Examining what Patsy communicated and how it aligns with or diverges from what her voice was simultaneously expressing. Patsy stated to the dispatcher, "Our daughter has been kidnapped." She provided the address. She asked for help. She communicated the presence of a ransom note. The content was coherent, despite her reported emotional state. But there is something subtle here. Throughout the call, Patsy is providing information and making requests. She is communicating with the dispatcher. She is engaging in a directed conversation. This is not the behavior of someone discovering a child in present distress. If she had heard her child screaming or calling for her during the call, would she have been able to maintain this level of communicative coherence? Consider the alternative scenario. A mother hears her child crying, screaming, or calling from somewhere in the house, perhaps from the basement, perhaps from a room she has not yet checked. While on the phone with the dispatcher, she would naturally indicate this to the dispatcher. She would say, "I hear her screaming," or "She's calling for me," or would exhibit the acoustic characteristic of simultaneous conversation and attending to another voice. The coherence and directedness of Patsy's communication with the 911 dispatcher, absent the intrusion of a child's voice demanding maternal attention, suggests that no child was actively vocalizing and seeking her attention during the call. The acoustic. Signature of maternal horror versus child pain. Let us separate these phenomena. A mother discovering that her child has been taken exhibits a vocalization pattern characterized by shock. The voice initially breaks or becomes incoherent as the mind processes information that contradicts expectation. Disbelief. Vocalizations often include repeated questioning, "No, no, no," or "Where is she? Where is she?" Reactive distress. The vocalization is a response to information understood, not to present physical threat. The acoustic signature includes high-frequency elevation, strained quality, tremor, and often breaks in vocalization as the caller switches between attempting to communicate with the dispatcher and managing their own emotional response. By contrast, a child in present pain or distress vocalizes with immediacy. The sound communicates present, ongoing threat. Rawness, less emotional mediation, more direct physiological response. Lack of linguistic coherence, crying or screaming rather than communicative speech. The acoustic signature includes very high fundamental frequencies, piercing quality, harmonic instability, and rapid variation in intensity. The question that rigorous acoustic analysis can address is, which of these signatures is audible in the 911 recording? The temporal analysis. What does voice degradation tell us? There is another dimension of acoustic analysis that merits examination: voice degradation over time. When a person has been screaming or vocalizing at high intensity for an extended period, the voice begins to show signs of degradation. The vocal folds become fatigued. The voice becomes hoarse. Frequency patterns shift. Harmonic clarity decreases. If, during the morning of December 26th, a child had been screaming continuously for an extended period, crying, calling for help, expressing distress, and if that child was then vocalizing during the 911 call, the voice would show acoustic characteristics of fatigue and strain. Alternatively, if the scream heard in the 911 recording represents a fresh vocalization, produced for the first time, during or immediately before the call, the voice would have characteristics of acute distress without degradation. This distinction could potentially indicate whether a child had been vocalizing for hours before the 911 call, or whether any child vocalization present was recent or immediate. The deception analysis. Could the scream be staged? A darker possibility also demands consideration. Acoustic analysis can, in some cases, distinguish between genuine emotional vocalization and vocalizations that are performed or intentionally produced with the goal of creating a false impression. Genuine distress typically produces what forensic voice analysts call supraglottal effects, involuntary acoustic characteristics that result from genuine emotional arousal. These include pitch breaks caused by sudden shifts in laryngeal tension due to emotion, tremor or vibrato caused by involuntary muscle tension, breathiness or harshness caused by incomplete vocal fold closure due to stress, vocal fry or register shifts caused by physiological disruption. These effects are difficult to fake consistently because they result from neurophysiological processes that are not under conscious control. An actor or a person deliberately producing a distressed vocalization might create what appears to be a scream, but acoustic analysis can often reveal the distinctive characteristics of performed emotion versus genuine emotion. Could the screaming sounds present in the 911 recording represent an intentional recreation of the vocalization Patsy believed would be expected to hear, a mother's scream, rather than a genuine vocalization of maternal horror? This is not to make an accusation, but rather to identify what rigorous acoustic analysis might reveal. If the screaming sounds show acoustic characteristics consistent with performance or deliberate production, rather than with genuine emotional arousal, this would be forensically significant. The unanswered question: why no rigorous acoustic analysis? And here we arrive at a question that may be more significant than any acoustic finding itself. If forensic acoustic analysis of the 911 recording, conducted by certified voice scientists using spectral analysis, fundamental frequency measurement, and established comparative methodology, could have provided objective data about the source and emotional authenticity of sounds within that recording, why was such analysis apparently not conducted, or if conducted, not made public? Audio forensics is an established discipline. Methodology exists. Experts are available. The 911 recording is preserved. The technical capacity to conduct rigorous analysis has existed for decades. The absence of such analysis, or its non-disclosure, leaves open the possibility of significant information remaining unrevealed. It leaves open the question of whether acoustic evidence exists that would clarify or complicate the official timeline and account of events. The behavioral correlation. What Patsy's own description suggests. Patsy's own description of her vocalization during the discovery phase provides behavioral corroboration for certain acoustic findings. She stated, "I screamed for John." She described her voice as cracking. She said, "I remember my voice was just cracking. I mean, it was like John, like that." She further stated, "My knees were like, buckling. And oh God." This is language of acute physiological distress, the kind that would produce specific acoustic characteristics. Voice cracking typically indicates rapid shifts in laryngeal tension caused by emotional arousal. Buckling knees indicate adrenaline response and autonomic activation. The language suggests genuine shock and physical disruption. But this description applies to the scream calling for John, which occurred immediately upon discovery of the absence. Does it apply equally to the screaming sounds present in the 911 recording itself? Or had some time passed, allowing for recovery of vocal stability? These are the distinctions that acoustic analysis could clarify. The timeline reconstruction. What vocal analysis implies if rigorous acoustic analysis were conducted and revealed that all vocalizations in the 911 recording have acoustic properties consistent with an adult female in emotional distress, fundamental frequencies in the 150-300 Hz range, harmonic complexity consistent with adult vocal tract, acoustic signature of genuine emotional arousal? This would support the timeline as officially stated. Alternatively, if analysis revealed that screaming vocalizations have acoustic properties consistent with a child, high fundamental frequencies, 300 to 6 Hz, acoustic signature of acute pain or present distress, evidence of laryngeal compression from a physical device. This would suggest a child was present and in distress during the 911 call itself, which would require explanation not currently present in the official account. The reconstruction of timeline using vocal evidence is not speculative. It is forensic methodology applied to available evidence. What remains unexamined? In the end, this analysis returns to a fundamental point. Critical evidence relating to the timeline and to what was happening in the Ramsey home during the critical early morning hours may exist within the 911 recording itself. The human voice, in its acoustic properties, contains information about the speaker's identity, emotional state, physical status, and the chronological moment in which the vocalization occurred. Whether that information has been rigorously examined, whether it has been found to be consistent with or contradictory to the official timeline, whether it reveals something about the identity or status of persons present or absent at that moment. These are questions that rigorous forensic audio analysis could address. The absence of such publicly disclosed analysis, or the non-discovery of such analysis being conducted, raises its own question. What might be revealed if every acoustic detail of that recording were subjected to college-level forensic scrutiny? And why, given the significance of timeline reconstruction in this case, has such analysis apparently not been prioritized or disclosed? The voice, in its ultimate form, cannot lie. It can only reveal what the body, in its physiological moment, is expressing. To ignore what the voice itself says is to ignore evidence that exists and that speaks with the authority of the human body itself.
So I think so we've been talking about, sort of like what's on the 911 call. I think there's a lot of debate about that. What people think they hear, what people say they hear. I think I've been very vocal that I really don't hear anybody other than Patsy. But people say in the enhanced call they hear someone else. We know, my only thing would be that when you listen, you have to listen for, which people are they're trying to listen for the sort of high-pitched structure of the voices. And I think that's what people are saying. They're saying I can hear sort of this high-pitched structure that is different from Patsy's, and like there's a certain quality or pitch or like harmonic structure to a child's voice versus an adult's voice, even if the adult has like a high-pitched voice themselves. There's still like a certain structure that makes you say, is that a kid? And if it was a kid and there was a child present during this 911 call, it might be something slightly disturbing. So I think I do find a little bit of I don't know, because John, we know that for a fact that John was there for at least a little bit of time. We know that John was there. He was on his hands and knees, apparently reading the ransom note at the time. We know that for a fact. What they tell us is that John didn't have anything to say. He was just reading the ransom note and going through it. Which is kind of interesting, because when Patsy was on the phone, John said in the interviews, he had the note and he was reading it sprawled out on the floor. But when Kim asked Patsy, what does the note say? Patsy said, I don't know. And she said, can you read it? And Patsy said, it says something like SBTC victory or something like that. And it sounded like she was reading. You know what I mean? It sounded like she was reading that off of something, which would mean that either she tapped John and motioned to John and said, give me the letter, or Kim Archuleta was on speakerphone. Now, I can't remember that. I saw the type of phone that it was in the forums, in the Reddit forums. Somebody was, you got to go in the Reddit forums every now and again. Somebody was diligent enough to look up the type of phone that they were using. I was like, what? That's crazy. But I can't remember what type of phone system it was or what type of phone it was. But I don't know if that phone had speakerphone on it. And if that's the case, then that would mean that John actually wasn't on the ground. And he would actually have been standing up, listening in on the call. Or standing close by. You know how it is. You know what I'm saying? That to where, somebody's on the phone and you've got your ear to the other side of the phone. And if that's the case, we go back into this spiral to where I feel a little bit uneasy again. Because I don't know, man. I just feel like there's some weird stuff going on. You know what I mean? Like there's some weird stuff going on. I don't like it, man. Because if this is the case, at some point in time, John said that he went upstairs to go get dressed before Officer French came, and he said he was back down before Officer French came inside. He was actually pause. He was actually the one who answered the door. But Patsy said he was down there when she was on the phone, and that was at 5:52. Officer French got there like 5 minutes later, like 5:57. Patsy said it took him like 10 minutes to get dressed. If it took John 10 minutes to get dressed, that's like 6:02. Then that means that Patsy would have had to answer the door, because John would have been upstairs getting dressed for at least another like 5 minutes. And so that doesn't make sense to me. Like John would have been upstairs for at least another 5 minutes. There's no way he could have answered that door if he was down there, unless he was already dressed. And I'm not saying he was. I'm just throwing that out there. There's no way that you could be down there unless you already got your clothes on and you waiting for the officer to show up. And I don't know why you would lie about being dressed. Just say, we both got up. I got up at this early this morning. I was in the shower. I got out of the shower. I got my clothes on. By the time I'm getting my pants on, I hear my wife scream, and I start putting on my shirt slowly, and I look over and I'm like, what the heck? And I say, babe, what is it? And she says, you got to come down here. This is note saying that JonBenet is missing and she's not in her room. You got to come down here now. So I finished putting my shirt on, and my shirt on, and I ran downstairs and I looked in the room and I was like, what's going on? And, but you would just tell us that your shirt is on. But if your shirt is on, then that means you're fully dressed. What's wrong with just telling me that you're fully dressed? Just basically say, I'm fully dressed. I was ready to go. That's how I was able to open this door. But This is the problem that I have consistently, because it goes back to this idea that John and Patsy give you trouble over stuff that they don't gotta give you trouble over. If you were already dressed, John, just tell me you were already dressed. If you fed the girl pineapple as a midnight snack, just tell me you fed a pineapple. If this is your flashlight, just tell me it's your flashlight. If this bat belongs to Burke, just tell me it belongs to Burke. If you guys own a pair of high-tech boots, then just tell me you own a pair of high-tech boots. You got one person saying I do, you got another person saying I don't. We don't own no boots. I've never seen them. And the other person's like, oh yeah, I did have some boots like that. Oh, that ain't our bat. I've never seen a bat like that. Oh yeah, that's my bat. What? Oh no, he never woke up. He doesn't wake up. When I put him to bed, I know for a fact he stayed down in bed. No, I got up there in the middle of the night. What? Nah, they would have never drank tea during this time. Nah, that's a summer drink. Oh no, I had it at the Christmas party. What the heck is going on? If you had your clothes on, bro, just say it. But something weird is happening where for some reason I can't get you to admit basic facts. It's like it's annoying because it's similar to somebody saying, an officer coming up and saying, how old are you? And you're like, I don't got to tell you how old I am at all. And you're like, man, look, I'm not trying to do anything. I'm just trying to write you I'm not even trying to write you a ticket. I'm actually about to let you go. So the cop is just giving you straight up, look, I don't want to write you a ticket. I just want to let you go. I just want to get your name, get some information, give you a warning, let you go. Will you allow me to do that for you? I know my rights. I don't have to give you nothing, this, that, and the third. You got to do that. You got to first tell me why you did it, blah, 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 blah. I done met too many people like you and this, that, and I'm not. Just give me license and registration. That's it. And I'm not talking about anybody in particular. I'm just saying in general. I'm not mocking anybody. I'm just saying in general, that's similar to you doing that. That would be like you doing that, right? Saying, essentially giving somebody trouble when you don't need to give them trouble, right? That's like you going up to somebody and saying, hey, can you hand me that salt? Why? You got arms. You can get it yourself. Why? You see I'm clearly doing something. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't want any trouble, man. I just want the salt. That's it. I don't want no problem. I just want the salt. But every single time I ask you for something that seems insignificant to me, you give me problems. And I think that's what's happening with this phone call. I'm asking you, John, could we have heard you on the call? Because you were sitting right there with the letter. And all John has to say is, I mean, possibly, I was standing right there and, she was asking me what the letter said. And I told her it says this or whatever. Done deal. But instead of saying that, they deny everything at every single turn. And it almost turns into like, are you just saying no to say no? Are you just telling me no just to say no? If that's the case, we need to have a different conversation. Like, look, man, I'm not trying to hem you up. I'm not trying to put you in any kind of position. I'm just asking, can you answer this question for me? And it goes to the point to where not only did John and Patsy not answer any questions, they said, give me my daughter. We're leaving the state. Give her to us now. We haven't even, what's with all the hostility? We haven't even we're not even done conducting our research here and our investigation here. What's with the hostility? We want to give her a proper burial now. I wonder, you won't tell me that John is on the call. You're just probably going to say Patsy is on the call. That's all we can hear. That's fair. Because if it is the case that there was, because you can admit John, because we know he was there. If it was the case that somebody happened to come up and say, oh, I was on the call. You may have heard me because I heard mom going psycho and I came downstairs. Or it could be the case that you hear, maybe there are theories about somebody spending the night. So you may have heard somebody else on the call. And that person may have been downstairs as well and said something. But it kind of leans toward this idea, and I'm sorry I'm working through this slowly, but it kind of leans toward this idea that even if Burke were on the call, we would never hear it, whether he was innocent or not. Just innocently coming downstairs like, Mom, because it would be reasonable if I ask you, did Burke come downstairs and did he say anything? It would be reasonable to say, well, yeah, he's 9 years old. He's interested. He came downstairs because he heard me screaming to the top of my lungs, and he came down and he wanted to make sure that I was okay. He knew what was going on because Burke's door was cracked. So he knew not only are you screaming, but your scream is going right into his room. So it's a little hard for me to believe that Burke slept through that. With all the commotion and with as loud as Patsy probably was on the phone, it's hard for me to believe that Burke stayed asleep through all of that commotion. You would at least get up and peek your head out of the door and just try to see what's going on. Because nobody can sleep through that. As you clearly admitted to us and said, as Burke clearly admitted to us and said, no, I was awake. Officer came in, shined his flashlight. Mom came in and said, where's my baby? Patsy could not recollect that she went in the room. But apparently Burke said she came in. What he did not say, though, was that John came in. And John said he went in, but he's fuzzy on whether Patsy went in or not. But John said that he went in there a couple times. He said he went in there that morning to check on Burke. And then he said he went in there again later on that day to look out of the window through the front yard over to the neighbor's house. But Burke doesn't mention John coming in. And so we have sort of like this round robin, even with the phone call, of people's inability, I should say, to vouch for one another. They're not vouching for one another in a sense of like the stories don't align. As we mentioned before, the bat conversation, the high-tech boot conversation, the pineapple bowl conversation, the tea glass conversation, the getting up in the middle of the night conversation. Who was downstairs when the phone call was made? That conversation. We don't have complete and total alignment on those. And like I said, Patsy said I may or may not have gone in there. I don't know. I can't remember. And Burke said she did. But John said he went in there, and Burke didn't say, oh yeah. Burke says a police officer came in there, but he didn't say Dad came in there. Which I find quite funny because the way that John describes it is John describes it as him sort of lording over Burke. And he doesn't use those exact terms, but he describes his behavior as sort of watching over Burke, making sure that Burke is okay, explaining to Burke what needs to be explained. Hey, this happened. You know, we're going to send you over here. Kind of really sort of walking Burke and holding his hand through the process. And leading him, and so, okay, this you got to get up, buddy. This is what we're going to do next. You're going to go over here, and they're going to take good care of you. Nobody can even go over there and ask Burke questions, and John is ticked off. How dare you? That's against my rights, blah, 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 blah. He is livid. You didn't ask us. You didn't get consent from us. And it's like, oh, yeah, I'm just asking questions. I understand that, but was he going to tell me something that he wasn't supposed to tell me? And so you would think that with as much as John describes him being with Burke and lording over Burke, that Burke that would remember, yeah, my dad was kind of just there. He was just kind of there. He was watching over me. He came in the room and he talked to me for a little bit and this, that, and the third. Burke doesn't remember, or he doesn't communicate that John came in there and had any conversation with him. He doesn't mention that. I think if I remember correctly, he mentions that, hey, my dad came in there, woke me up and said, I'm leaving, going to Fleets. But he doesn't mention that his dad came in there to sort of check on him. I don't like it. I don't like it. It's too much. Like, that doesn't seem like a big deal, right? I understand that. That doesn't seem like a big deal. But, like, like, the best way I can explain is, like, when you try to fit a puzzle piece in a certain, like at a certain, like, part of the puzzle, it looks like it should fit. It's kind of the same shape. But the puzzle piece that belongs here kind of has a sort of like a ascending edge, right? And the puzzle piece that I'm holding kind of has sort of like a descending one. So when I try to put it there, like the middle part fits, but there's like this little space in between because it's not supposed to go down like that. And so it doesn't fit perfectly. And that's what I'm saying. It's like it almost fits, but it doesn't. That's what's giving me trouble, is that it's almost supposed to be there, but it's not all sort of like cohesive, right? If I walk to you and I say, well, you and I are standing there, we don't know each other, right? You and I are standing there and a car comes by speeding at 60 miles an hour. And they go off the road, unfortunately, and the car flips. When the cops come and ask us, what you saw might be a little bit more detailed than what I saw. I might say, man, I came out of this burger spot. I look left. All of a sudden, I see this silver car shooting past me. And next thing I know, it's flipping. You might say, I've been standing out here for 30 minutes. I looking down here at the light. I'm just looking left. I'm just sipping my coffee. I look down here. I see a silver Ford Expedition turn left. And somebody cut in front of him. He got mad, so he sped up to try to cut in front of the black car that cut in front of him. The light turned red. The black car slowed down and saw it, but he didn't see it. So he kept going through. He just barreled through, and then, boom, next thing you know, he's over here. The cops will say, okay, cool. That makes sense. It's all in line. It fits perfectly. She just gave me a little bit more information than he did. But if you say your story, and then I instead say, oh, I think it was a Ford Focus. Yes, I saw a silver Ford Focus come through. The cop is going to say Ford Focus. I got you on the silver part, but Ford Focus? Yeah, right. They say, you know what a Ford Focus is, right? Yeah, it's a little car. She said it was an SUV, and I'm like, nah. I mean, it just depends on what you think an SUV is. An SUV is it can be whatever. Some people call silver. Yes, I'm with you when you say silver, but there's some sort of discrepancy when she says it's an Expedition or an Explorer, and you say it's a Ford Focus. That's a car, a compact car, and an SUV. It got to be one or the other. Can't be both. So now I got to, guess what? I'm going to question you more, because clearly that kind of threw me off. As if I'm the investigator, that threw me off. I'm going to say, what were you actually doing? I mean, honestly, I really wasn't looking. I came outside and all I saw was silver, a silver kind of car darting that way. I really wasn't looking. Honestly, I just heard a sound behind me and I turned around and I just saw this silver flash and then it was gone. And so the investigator can say, oh, okay, so you really didn't see it. You just heard it. And yeah, more or less. Yeah, I just kind of heard it. And I looked down and I just assumed that, maybe this was the case. That would make sense. That is where the puzzle piece would fit. And we could now connect the dots. But if you keep trying to argue me down and say that it was a Ford Focus, even though everybody on this block saw that it was a Ford Explorer, the piece ain't never going to fit. And I feel like that's what's happening here. Somebody's trying to tell us that it was a Ford Focus, but the evidence is like, it's Ford Explorer. All of this evidence is pointing to a Ford Explorer. Are you sure you didn't see a Ford Explorer? No. So I'm saying it's getting us close, but then it's like backing us off, and it's just like, it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird how that keeps happening. You get so close to hone in on something, and then it just dissipates. Oh no, it wasn't that. Something ain't right. You got something going on. I don't like it. I don't like what you're doing. But anyways, that's everything for now. I appreciate you watching, and take it easy.